Star Wars Dark Forces, a fan story. Star Wars Dark Forces opening crawl. The new order of the Empire stretches its evil clutches across the galaxy, consuming planets with devastating results. Through many struggles, the Rebel Alliance has learned of a new Imperial battle station, the Death Star, with enough power to destroy an entire planet. Unable to acquire the plans to the deadly space station, the rebels have employed the skills of Kyle Katarn, known to most as a mercenary for hire. Katarn is a rogue figure who has a partial alliance with the rebels. Armed only with a blaster pistol and an intimate knowledge of Imperial methods, Kyle prepares to infiltrate the Imperial base where the plans are kept. On the planet Lamu, a ringed world where most of its occupants just farm. It's a beautiful, wet, semi-tropical world. Well, this world was about to get a visitor, well, especially one farmstead, as a Lambda-class shuttle was making its way to the planet. The shuttle flies into the planet atmosphere and flies to the farmstead, where it begins the landing process. After the shuttle lands in the field, the bay doors open up. Well, by the shuttle was a family. A tall man, maybe mid-40s, his wife, and his young child. They were waiting to see who was visiting them as they were exiting the shuttle. Well, exiting the shuttle were several stormtroopers and a man wearing the white Security Bureau uniform and a long white cape. It was none other than Orson Krennic. He was in charge of security of the secret project that the Empire is working on, namely the Death Star's construction. And there has been a problem with plans being leaked, and he has been investigating, and his investigation led him to this planet. And the man who lives on this farm, a former security officer by the name of Anton Gurn. Well, Gurn had retired and was living peacefully on Lamu with his farm and his family. But the peace was about to be broken. Krennic asks him, "So, Gurn, how's retirement treating you?" Gurn said, "It's doing fine, Krennic." "So," asked Gurn, "what do I owe the visit?" Krennic said, "Well, I'll tell you why I'm here. I've been investigating a very bad leak of information from the secret project." "Oh," Krennic said, wait, let me rephrase that. "I'm investigating a hemorrhage of information being leaked to rebel groups left and right about the whereabouts and certain plans of the secret project. And my investigations is showing me that you're the one that has been causing this hemorrhage. Or maybe one of the people causing this hemorrhage. Because you had access to some very sensitive information." Gurn looks kind of nervous and says, Krennic. Krennic says, "Hey, you can call me by my first name. You're retired now." Gurn says, "Listen, I've had nothing to do with this leak or hemorrhage, as you say. I've been living peacefully for the last year and a half on my farm with my family. I'm just doing this now as a new life for me." Well, Krennic says, "I don't believe you." Then Krennic went on to say, "Let's just say my investigation is showing me that you might know certain people with certain ties to certain rebels, or who may be friends of certain rebels." So Krennic says, "I'm gonna give you an option. Gurn, let's just say if you don't tell me what I want to know, I'm going to kill your family. Gurn's face turned pale white, and he said nervously, Krennic, you won't do that. You're a nice guy. You're one of the nice ones. Krennic says to Gurn, listen, Gurn, when it comes to doing my job, I could be the coldest person you've seen. Especially when my job is on the line. When my neck is on the line, I should say. So, he says again to Gurn, who is leaking information to the rebels? Gurn's like, I don't know. Suddenly, Gurn's wife said, honey, please tell him. Please. Gurn says to his wife, be quiet. We don't know nothing. Well, Krennic said, it's a shame you don't know nothing. Krennic raises his hands and gives a hand command. Suddenly, a stormtrooper gets his rifle ready and shoots Gurn's family. Suddenly, Gurn looked in horror as his wife and child were lifeless on the ground. He turned to look at Krennic. His shock and sadness turned to anger and rage as he was about to charge and attack Krennic, but before he could do that, a stormtrooper shot him dead. Krennic looked on the ground where Gurn's lifeless body lay. He said, what a shame, Gurn. You could have avoided this if you talked. Well, Krennic turned to look at the stormtroopers and he says to them, search his house, find anything that would pertain to my investigation. The stormtrooper nodded their head with approval, and they searched the farmstead, and they found evidence that Krennic was looking for, who was supplying the leak to Gurn. So they boarded the shuttle and left the planet, leaving the bodies on the field to rot away. Well, meanwhile, in another part of the galaxy, on the prison planet of Wobani, a cold, desolate rock of a planet, it was the site of a imperial penal colony where many traitors and criminals are forced to work, usually until they drop. One such person was a man named Crix Nadine, a decorated imperial general who had ties to the rebels. Well, it was discovered, and he was imprisoned. He was sentenced to life of hard labor, a death sentence pretty much. He was in a transport vehicle that was taking him and several other prisoners to the mining quarry where he was going to start his work. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion and the transport vehicle stopped moving. All of a sudden, the back doors opened and several men come running inside. They were not stormtroopers. It was evident who they were. They were rebels. They came in, freed everybody who was chained, including Crix Nadine. Well, as Nadine was escorted outside, he saw stormtroopers laying dead on the ground. And then he saw it come, a U-Wing coming in for a landing. Well, Nadine and the rest of the men were huddled inside the U-Wing as the door shut and the U-Wing took off. Crix Nadine observed a built man, probably early 40s, with a curly afroed brown hair, telling the pilot of the U-Wing to inform Central that they've got the target as soon as they cleared the planet's atmosphere. Then the man turned to introduce himself by giving a salute to Nadine, and he says, General Crix Nadine, my name is Major Post of the Howling Commandos, and we're here to assist in your defection. Nadine said, well, I'm glad you guys got me before they would work me to death in the quarries. So who do I owe the thanks to besides you, Post? Nadine asked. Post said, well, that's easy. That's Garmbil Iblis. Once you sent your notice to defection, he sent us to come and get you. Nadine said, well, Post, your reputation does suit you. You did rescue me with surgical precision. I'm gonna look forward to working with you and the rest of the Rebel Alliance. Major Post then replied, the feeling is mutual, General, the feeling is mutual. Well, meanwhile, in another part of the galaxy, on the Ring of Kafrene, a mining colony inside an asteroid. It was a very bizarre place. It was full of many alien life forms of every shape, variety, skin color, and language. It looked like many places in the galaxy that were a little rough, dangerous to be there without some sort of weapon to protect you. Well, a man was walking around suspiciously, suspicious enough that he was drawing attention to himself. Besides the teeming extraterrestrials walking the cramped streets of the station, there also were stormtroopers walking about, keeping the peace, and probably looking for that suspicious looking man drawing attention to himself. Sure enough, as he was about to round a corner, a hand suddenly grabbed him and yanked him around the corner, and then a gun was up right against his face. It was a Briar pistol, and it belonged none other to than the man he was looking for, Kyle Katarn. Kyle Katarn was a man in his 20s, and a well-known mercenary whose reputation was growing. Next to Kyle, behind him, was a beautiful young woman with jet black hair. Her name was Jan Ors, his longtime partner. Well, Kyle pressed the man for information. He's like, well, buddy, you've been following me for a good long while out here and doing a bad job about it. What do you want? Asked Kyle angrily. The guy nervously said, Mr. Katarn, I bring a message to you, a job offer from Mon Mothma. She'll pay good money. She needs your skill and expertise if you're interested. He gives him a paper with written coordinates. Then the guy nervously says, if you don't take the job, just tear up the paper, please. Then Kyle let him go. The man ran off. Well, his running did draw attention to himself, and the stormtroopers chased him. One of the stormtroopers said, halt, you, right there. Well, the stormtroopers chased him on the streets. The man turned around with a blaster and shot one of the stormtroopers, but he missed. Well, the stormtroopers fired back, and he was dead. Well, Kyle turns to Jan and asks her, you think I should take the job? Jan said, I think you should. We need the money. And from what I heard, the rebels are paying good. Kyle's like, well, I don't know. Jan said, come on, Kyle. You know you want to do this. And plus, like I said, we really need the money. The Crow needs some upgrades to its engines. And we're not going to make the money for the engine upgrades doing Blue Milk Run jobs. Kyle says, you're right, Jan. Let's go. So the two make to their ship, the Moldy Crow. They board it, start up the engines, and take off. Well, they entered the coordinates and made the jump to light speed. They soon dropped out of light speed. The coordinates took them to a gas giant called Yavin, and they flew around the gas giant and saw a beautiful moon that was one of the only moons of that gas giant to support life. It had an ocean and it had a lot of land. And Kyle gets on the radio and asks for permission to land. He says, This is Kyle Katarn of the Moldy Crow requesting permission to land. They waited a good long minute until a voice came through the radio telling them where to land.
Moldy Crow, this is Yavin Base. You have permission to land. Land in the tallest temple outside. You will see us there. Over.
Well, the Moldy Crow landed at Yavin Base. The two left their ship, and they were greeted by a rebel officer, and he says, Kyle Katarn, Jan Ors, please follow me. I will direct you to meet Mon Mothma. Well, the officer took him into the base command center, where the Rebel Alliance leadership was. There was Mon Mothma, a woman of very tall, thin features and bright red hair. There was Garmbil Iblis, a middle-aged man with long white hair and a long, well-trimmed beard. And there was another figure there, but Kyle couldn't make out who he was. This man remained in the shadow like he did not want to be seen. Mon Mothma said, "Ah, Mr. Katarn, I'm glad you took the job offer. Your reputation has been growing, and I decided that you might be the man for the job, since you know how to break into heavily guarded installation, and you also were a former stormtrooper. So I thought you'd be the excellent choice for this job," she says. "Well, for the last 2 years," she went on to explain, "we've been involved with an operation called Operation Skyhook. We've learned of the existence of an Imperial superweapon secretly being constructed. Well, we learned about it, and we barely escaped from it. So now we have been, for the last 2 years, trying to find suitable blueprints about this secret weapon, but we've been getting little fragments left and right, nothing concrete on how to destroy it. That is, until we received a message." Then Mon Mothma went on to play a holographic message. The holographic image was a man, a very tall man who was built. He was probably in his early 40s and had a scar over his left eye, and he was detailing about his plan to defect and how he could help the rebels.
Greetings, my name is Galen Orso. I am the number 4 scientist on the construction of the superweapon christened the Death Star. I know the Empire must be stopped, and I'm the only one who knows how to stop it. I created a fatal design flaw in the superweapon, but the only way I'm going to reveal it if you rescue me. I sent the instructions to where I can be rescued with a pilot who's defecting to the Rebel Alliance also. His name is Bodhi. You must find him. He's on his way to you. He's going to your base at the planet Jedha.
Kyle Katarn says, "I didn't know you had a base out in Jedha." Well, Mon Mothma said, "We don't have a base in Jedha. That base he's talking about is the base of Saw Gerrera and his group, the Partisans." Katarn said, "The Partisans? Saw Gerrera? That's bad news." Mon Mothma said, "Exactly. Gerrera has become completely unstable now and is a danger. We completely broke off ties with him. But now he's pretty much waging his own one-man war. I don't even think he cares about the Republic anymore. I think he just wants revenge. Either way," she says, "you must go out to Jedha and get Bodhi Rook." Our records indicate that Bodhi Rook is in his early 20s and has been a pilot for maybe 2 or 3 years for the Empire. His performance record shows he's a heck of a pilot. We need pilots like him," said Mon Mothma. Kyle Katarn then says, "Okay, you got yourself a deal." Mon Mothma said, "Excellent. I'll pay you your standard fee, 30,000 credits." Kyle Katarn's like, "That's where we're going to have to talk," he said. Mon Mothma gave a look. It's like, "What do you mean?" "Well, Saw Gerrera is not exactly in the right state of mind anymore, last I heard, and Jedha's a very dangerous place, because there's a Imperial mining operation going on over there right now, so there's going to be a lot of Imperial soldiers walking around. So I'm going to have to charge my standard fee, and I'm also going to have to ask for some extra amenities like access to your spaceports, and right now my ship needs some upgrades and overhauls, and you have the parts, high quality parts that I can use to do it with, and the manpower. So standard fee plus access to your engine parts and manpower to upgrade my ship." Mon Mothma looked to the other rebel leaders. They all nodded their head yes. And she said, "Fine, Katarn, you'll have access to our supplies and our resources. And how long will this upgrade take? He turned to Jan, and Jan said, "With all the men working with me to help with the upgrades to the Moldy Crow, 16 hours." He turned and said to Mon Mothma, 16 hours. She said, "So be it. It's a deal." Well, meanwhile, on Jedha, a small, cold desert moon that orbits the planet Nudjeta. This moon pretty much is a very desolate moon. There's maybe only one major city, which is Nijeta, which is a site of pilgrimage for a system-only faith called the Brotherhood of Natis, a bizarre faith that originated with a man called Natis on the moon of Jedha. Not much is known about this faith, for the adherents have a strong code of silence. They don't discuss the faith to outsiders unless you convert and become one of the followers. Well, this faith never really left outside the system. Like I said, it was just a system-wide faith. Well, over the last couple of years, the Empire took interest in the moon as they discovered a big deposit of frick. And now, a mining operation had begun for the last 3 years, mining frick. And because of the rebel activity caused by Guerrera and his partisans, a Star Destroyer named the Devastator floats above the Holy City, keeping a very strong Imperial presence there. Well, out in the Great Desert, a young man in his early 20s roams there. He had a beard that was growing, and he had his jet black hair tied back in a very tight ponytail. He wanders out in the cold desert until he sees a giant statue of a hooded figure laying on the ground, half buried by the sand. He wonders if this is the moon's faith founder, but his questions would quickly go unanswered as he was ambushed by a ragtag group of mercenaries that attacked him. They had their guns pointed at him. The leader of this group was a giant Tugnath, a very scary-looking humanoid alien. His name was Benthic. Benthic spoke in his native Tugnath language as he was asking Bodhi what was he doing here. Bodhi said, "I'm here to see your leader, Saw Gerrera." He pulls out a data card and says, "I have information for him, important information for him and the rebels." Benthic looks and says in his language, "Well, fine, we'll take you to see Saw." So, the gun still pointed on him. They took him to see Saw Gerrera in the catacombs of Cadera. Well, Saw Gerrera was there, looking kind of crazy. The middle-aged Ondarian was a shell of his former self. Just like Vader, he was more machine than man now. He had 2 prosthetic legs and a life support suit that he always pulled the breathing mask up and took big breaths since he couldn't breathe with his own lungs anymore. Well, he also was not in the greatest state of mind now. Everybody said he had gone crazy ever since the accident that left him the way he was. Now, he was just reduced to hiding out in the desert, doing little guerrilla attacks in the city and other nearby systems. And the partisans themselves were just mainly criminals that he recruited. Well, they took him to see Gerrera. Gerrera looked at the young pilot and he said, "What are you doing here?" Bodhi said, I came here to give you a message." Well, Benthic lied and said, "We caught this man in the desert. He was sneaking around." Bodhi said, No. I'm here because I have information from Galen Urso about the secret weapon that the Empire is building." Saw Gerrera not believing him, said, "So, they sent a spy to try to kill me. Oh no, they won't succeed." Gerrera gives a command and says, "Put him in the cells." Well, his men threw Bodhi into a cell. Suddenly, Bodhi heard the roar of some monster coming. It looked like a giant octopus coming his way. Gerrera began laughing. "You try to kill me, but you won't. Borgullet will probe your mind, make you talk, and then I will learn." Well, Benthic gives Gerrera the data card that Bodhi had on him. As the monster was coming closer to Bodhi and Bodhi was panicking, Gerrera quickly puts the data card in the reader, and the holographic image appeared, and it began to speak its message.
"Greetings, I am Galen Urso, one of the designers of the Death Star. If you want to know where the weakness of the Death Star is, I know where the plans are located at, but you must rescue me. I am at the planet Edu at the laboratory research station there. You can reach me there, but you must fly under 500 feet in order to avoid the radar."
After Gerrera saw the message, he turns around to go back to the cell where Bodhi was locked up. By now, the monster had begun wrapping its tentacles around Bodhi. Now, we go to the other end of the galaxy, in the planet Despair, where the Death Star nears completion. The major super laser dish was being installed. A certain figure was looking out the window of the bridge of his Star Destroyer. It was none other than Moff Tarkin. He turns around after the dish is installed and walks over to the doorway. He was expecting somebody. Well, the door to the bridge opens up, and sure enough, it was Krennic. Krennic comes in and says, "Oh, Moff Tarkin, I see you already installed the super laser." Tarkin says, "Yes, we have. Now the station is 98% complete. I think within a couple weeks, it'll be in full operation, if not sooner." Well, Krennic said, "Congratulations, Moff Tarkin. I hope your secret weapon brings order to the chaos that's going on right now." Tarkin takes a jab at Krennic and says, "Well, I hope you bring order to the chaos that you seem to cause." It rubbed Krennic the wrong way. Krennic said, "Listen, you know how big that station is? You know how big this project is? There's no way I can keep everything tightly sealed without a few leaks." Tarkin says, "Krennic, last I checked, this was not a leak. It was a floodgate that opened up." Then Tarkin says, "And this just popped up." Then Tarkin plays the holographic message of Galen Urso, the one that the rebels had intercepted. After letting the message go for a few seconds, Tarkin cuts it off and says, "Well, apparently the Emperor found out about this, and he gave me a very nasty call this morning. A very nasty call. And he's going to want a sacrificial lamb. And guess who's going to be that sacrificial lamb?" Krennic said, "Don't remind me." Tarkin said, "Exactly. The man who's head of security of this project." "Oh, man," said Tarkin. "You really blundered up, Krennic. You really blundered up." "Well, the Emperor is giving you a deadline to fix this problem. And if you don't meet this deadline of 30 days, I don't know what he's going to do to you. And I frankly shudder at the thought of the Emperor being angry, because we all know what happens when the Emperor is angry. He's a very scary man." Well, Krennic turns around and angrily storms off the bridge of the Star Destroyer. Well, meanwhile, on Jedha, the Moldy Crow finally arrives. Then Kyle and Jan leave the ship. As they walk through the crowded streets of Nijeda, the capital city, Jan says, I don't like this planet. I don't like this city. I'm surprised 5 seconds we haven't been beset by beggars. Suddenly, a bunch of beggars come on them and start begging for money and feeling on them. Kyle shooed them away. Jan said, I spoke too soon. Kyle says, well, don't speak too soon about finding the partisans or Saw Gerrera or Bodhi. I have a feeling that everybody knows something here, but with that Star Destroyer above, they're not going to say anything. And if they do want to say something, it's going to cost a pretty penny. Jan says, you're right. Well, let's go looking around, she says. There's got to be some clue to where the partisans are hiding out at. Sure enough, Imperials were walking in the streets, and there was a massive tank. That tank was a TX-225 occupier tank. It was small, but it could pack a lot of trouble with all the blaster cannons it had. Sure enough, as the tank approached the city square, it was attacked by the partisans. Kyle Katarn quickly pulls out his Briar pistol and shoots both stormtroopers and partisan soldiers. Then he runs, pulling Jan with him down a boulevard to get away from most of the fight. Well, the fight was over quickly, but there were equal casualties on both sides, the Imperials and the partisan sides. As Kyle was running and made a turn, there were suddenly a bunch of guns pointing at him. It was Benthic, Saw Gerrera's number 2 man. He said in his language, "You're coming with us." Jan said, well, I think we didn't have to look far for the partisans. Well, as Kyle and Jan were being taken away as prisoners by the partisans, some more stormtroopers arrived on the scene, along with a very familiar black figure walking down the battle-torn boulevards and square. It was Darth Vader, surveying the damage of the battle. He sees one of the men still alive. Vader lifts him up from the ground and begins to interrogate him.
Where is Saw Gerrera?
Vader had the man in a chokehold as both of his hands were wrapped around the man's neck. The man said, the man was dead. Vader lets go of the grip and the body hits the ground. Then a stormtrooper comes up to Darth Vader and says, Lord Vader, did you get anything out of him, sir? Darth Vader then says,
I have. They are hiding out at the catacombs of Cadera. Muster all our forces and get the TIE fighters ready. We're going to attack.
Meanwhile, in the catacomb hideouts of the partisans, Kyle and Jan were now prisoners of Saw Gerrera, who came up to them, and he said, So, you come to kill me too, you two. I bet you were sent by Mon Mothma. They think I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. I'm sanest of all. I'll win this war my way. Now I know where weakness of super weapon is, he said. Then Kyle says to him, maybe the Saw Gerrera of 10 years ago could have done this, but not now. I don't think so. Look at you. You're pathetic looking. You couldn't even hurt a Danbian fly. Gerrera looks with anger at Kyle, and he says to his man angrily, Throw those two with that other killer. Well, sure enough, Kyle and Jan were thrown in the same cell as Bodhi. Bodhi looked at them and it said, Oh, they got you too, huh? Kyle looked at Bodhi and said, I take it you're the one we're looking for. Kyle introduced himself. I'm Kyle Katarn. This is my partner, Jan Ors. The young pilot introduced himself. Yep, Bodhi Rook, he said. I came here to deliver information, and suddenly I got thrown in here because they think I'm some assassin sent by the Empire. Kyle says to Bodhi, well, I don't know where you got your information from, but apparently the rebel leaders don't work with Saw Gerrera anymore because he's gone crazy over the years. and his actions have proved it. So they distance himself completely from Saw, and Saw is just a little despot running his own little fiefdom out here in the desert, trying to overthrow a massive empire with a bunch of criminals. Bodhi says, "Oh, just freaking great. I don't know who gets us these information, these intelligence reports." Well, Kyle says, "It's too late now. We have to figure out how to get out of here." Well, Kyle sees a rock, small enough to fit through the railings of the cage, and he says, "Maybe I could hit the controls. If I can focus, then I can do it." Unknown to Kyle, Kyle was a force sensitive, something he'll learn to develop in the future. So Kyle grabs the rock, puts his arm with the rock through the cage. He focuses, tapping into the force, and throws the rock. He smashes the control on the wall, which causes the cage to lift open. The three heroes ran out, and as they were leaving the little detention area, they found their belongings on the table. Kyle's briar pistol, Jan's pistol, and Bodhi's pistol. They took their weapons back and the gear they had on them back. Well, there was a guard there, and Kyle shot him dead with his briar pistol. They fought their way through the hideout until they reached a garage area. There they saw several land vehicles there and a couple speeder bikes. They jumped on the speeder bikes, each one of them, started up the engine and took off. Well, they escaped just in time, for Darth Vader and the 501st were closing in on the hideout. One of Guerrero's men comes up and says, "Saw, the three prisoners escaped somehow, but we have bigger problems. There's a big group of stormtroopers coming our way and TIE fighters." Well, Guerrero says, "Everybody, to battle stations now. Launch the Z-95 headhunters. We will fight till the last. They will not defeat us." Well, the Z-95 headhunters took off and engaged the TIE fighters. The Z-95 fighters, the group was being led by Edrio, Benthic's eggmate. But the fight was getting ugly in the air, even though the 95s were more than capable of taking on the TIE fighters, but the TIE fighters were just way too numerous. Well, Guerrero's Air Force was all about wiped out. The rest had retreated. Meanwhile, on the ground, the stormtroopers made short work of the entire partisans, while all the remaining members of the partisans just fled. Vader marched into the catacombs, triumphant. In the command area, there he was standing there, the proud soldier that he was, Saw Gerrera, waiting. He says to Vader, "So, Darth Vader, you think you won, but you haven't. I will defeat you. Oh, I will defeat you. I know who you are. You are Anakin Skywalker. Oh, you thought I'd never figured out, but I figured it out. You greatest Jedi ones now, Dark Lord of the Sith. Well, you're gonna be a memory soon." Saw Gerrera grabs his cane and pulls out a vibroblade that was hidden in the cane. Then Darth Vader grabs the hilt of his lightsaber and fires it up. Then Vader began swinging his lightsaber around. Soon, Vader and Gerrera were dueling. Vader's lightsaber versus Guerrero's vibroblade, the only weapon known to stand up against a Jedi's lightsaber. But Saw Gerrera was no match against Vader. Soon Vader cut his arm that was holding the vibroblade, then cut the other arm off, and then proceeded to cut both of his cybernetic legs off slowly with his lightsaber. Now Guerrero lied on the floor with no arms and no legs. He was just a stub on the floor. And Vader just stood there, breathing, staring at him, probably smiling with glee behind his mask. Vader turns and walks away from Saw Gerrera. As Vader walks away, suddenly cave-ins start to begin. Vader was using his force powers to cause the entire catacombs to start caving in behind him. As Vader walks back outside, the entrance caves in behind him. Now Saw Gerrera was buried alive in his hideout. He has failed, and it was only a matter of time before death comes and claims him. Without hands, he can't reach for his oxygen mask and breathe. It was only a matter of time before he dies. Vader had won, and his secret that he found out about Vader was useless because that was going with him to the grave. Well, Kyle, Jan, and Bodhi had made it back to Nijeda and started for their ships. The two young mercenaries went into the Moldy Crow while Bodhi went into his ship, and they quickly took off. Again, they avoided disaster, for Vader returns to his ship on the bridge of his Star Destroyer, the Devastator. He gives the order,
"Call back all the troops to the ship, and all the fighters to the ship, and take us into a higher altitude and bomb this city to dust."
"Yes, Lord Vader," said the captain. Then the captain asked Darth Vader, "Lord Vader, what do we say about the bombing of the city?" Vader says to the captain,
"Officially, the explosion was caused by a mining accident."
Well, all the stormtroopers came back to the ship. All the TIE fighters came back to the ship. The Devastator began floating higher and higher and higher, and then released a missile towards the city. The missile went into the heart of the city, and there was a massive explosion leveling the city. Well, as the Star Destroyer was leaving the moon, the captain comes up to Darth Vader and says, "Lord Vader, the Emperor wants to speak to you right now." Darth Vader then says,
"I will take the call in my private chambers."
Soon Vader makes it to his private chamber. He goes and kneels down to one knee as the holographic communication opens up and the Emperor's head was seen. The Emperor asks, "Lord Vader, how's the hunt for Saw Gerrera going?" Darth Vader replies back,
"My lord, Saw Gerrera's just a memory now, and the partisans are all but gone. I destroyed Nijeda. Officially, it's going to be declared a mining accident, Your Majesty."
Then the Emperor says, "Ah, Vader, I am proud of you. I have a new assignment for you. There has been a massive leak about the existence of the Death Star." Then the Emperor went on to say, "You must find the leak and stop it at all cost." Then Vader goes on to say,
"Yes, my Emperor, consider it done."
Well, back at Yavin Base, at the command room, Kyle Katarn, Jan Ors were there with Bodhi Rook. Mon Mothma congratulated them on a job well done, and she asked Kyle Katarn, "Well, I want to ask you for one more favor," she said. "Kyle, only you could break into a heavily guarded installation, like the one that Bodhi had described where Galen Erso was at." Kyle said to Mon Mothma, "Fine, it will actually be a walk in the park compared to rescuing Bodhi Rook from the clutches of Saw Gerrera." Well, but he also said, "I'll need 10,000 extra." Mon Mothma looked and said, "Done." Well, Kyle and Jan boarded the Moldy Crow and quickly took off to the planet Edu. Well, Edu was a storm-ridden planet, always under a massive storm, every part of the planet. The perfect hiding place for an Imperial research facility. Going by Bodhi's instructions, Once they arrived into the atmosphere, they flew below 500 feet, avoiding radar detection, through the craggy canyons and the pouring rain and crashing lightning. Well, Kyle gave instructions to Jan. Wait in the Moldy Crow, and if he needs help, he'll call her and she just has to fly to his rescue. So, Kyle Katarn left the comforts of the Moldy Crow and wandered through the rain-soaked canyons on his journey to find Galen Erso. A very perilous journey. He arrives to a high point and uses an electronoculars to look and sees that Galen Erso was walking out to the landing platform in the soaking rain. Then he also sees a shuttle come flying in and land on the landing platform by Galen Erso. But now Erso was joined with several scientists out in the landing platform. So Kyle quickly rushed to the edge of the facility, the mountain, and he saw an elevator shaft. The railings were big enough for him to climb, so he began his perilous journey climbing the rain-soaked elevator shaft. As he was climbing his way up, Galen Erso was confronting Krennic on the rain-soaked platform. Krennic was saying to Erso and the scientists out in the soaking rain, he says to them, I know there's been a security leak about the existence of the Death Star project, and it originated from here. So, I'm going to do the old-fashioned thing, and I'm going to give you a chance to step out and confess your wrongdoing. And if you do, I'll give you a light sentence. If you don't, I'm going to start killing each and every one of you until one of you start confesses. Galen Erso says, Krennic, this is completely unnecessary. Leave these men alone. None of them leaked information out. Krennic said, Really, Erso? Then how come the rebels know about the existence of the Death Star? Erso said, maybe somebody else in another part of the project that has been leaking. Krennic gives the order to the stormtrooper, kill all the scientists, except for Erso. Well, the stormtroopers gun down all the scientists, leaving only Galen Erso alive. Krennic turns around and says, I know it was you, Erso. Now, look what you have done. You caused the deaths of all these top scientists. And I'm gonna execute you right now. There's gonna be no trial, nothing. You have been found guilty, and you're going to die. But, unbeknownst to Krennic and Erso, Kyle Katarn made his way up to the landing platform and was starting to stealthily take down each and every one of the stormtroopers. He pulls out his gun and starts taking a shot at Krennic. Well, the shot hit Krennic in the part of the shoulder where the shoulder connects to the torso, badly injuring him. He fell onto the landing platform of the shuttle. Then he starts running, but the stormtroopers killed Galen Erso and then try to take shots at Kyle. But Kyle fights back and starts gunning down the stormtroopers and then gets on a communicator at the same time and screams, Jan, you better get over here, I'm going to need help. Well, the shuttle takes off as Krennic gets away, and Kyle surrounded by stormtroopers. All of a sudden, the Moldy Crow comes flying in and blasts the stormtroopers down and blasts the entrance to the facility, preventing any more from coming out. The Moldy Crow lands on the landing platform. Jan Ors comes running out and says, Kyle, are you okay? Kyle says, yes, I am. He runs over to Galen Erso. He was still alive, but just barely. Galen Erso said with his dying breath, take this, as he reaches into his uniform and pulls out a data card. He gives it to Kyle, and then he dies for good. Kyle says, "Come on, let's get out of here before reinforcements come." So they jump into the Moldy Crow and take off, leaving Edu and leaving Galen Urso. Well, a day or two later, Kyle and Jan were back at Yavin Base. Well, even though Galen Urso was dead, all was not lost. The data card contained information onto the Death Star plans. Mon Mothma was briefing Kyle and Jan, and she said, "Well, the data card that Urso gave you reveals that the Death Star plans are in a special archives located on Danuta on a base near the capital city. Unfortunately, it's a heavily guarded installation. Plus, he revealed in the data card that the weakness he had incorporated into this Death Star was a fake exhaust port. It's non-functioning, but it goes directly to the reactor. But we need those blueprints from Danuta to find it, where he gave the number of which exhaust port it is and everything. We just need those plans to find it. So, I'm going to ask you a big favor again," said Mon Mothma to Kyle. "This time I'll give you 50,000 more credits if you can break in and steal those plans and take it to a rendezvous so they could be transmitted." Kyle then says to Mon Mothma, "Fine, I'll take the job, but it's going to take a couple days of planning. I have a friend who works at that installation. His name is Mech Odom. He might be able to help. Just give me a couple days. It's not easy to reach him, but I'll reach him and see if he'll help me. If not, I'm going to have to really do some heavy planning to break into that facility." Mon Mothma said, "Okay." Well, as the rebels were planning to steal the Death Star plans, at the Star Destroyer commanded by Moff Tarkin, there was much celebration as Moff Tarkin was promoted to Grand Moff. And there was much delight in the bridge, and there was even a little festivity going on. Well, arriving to the festivities was Krennic. Krennic's like, "Congratulations, Grand Moff, on your promotion." Tarkin said, "Yes, Krennic. It is a big day of celebration. Years of hard work have led me to this point. A new rank of Grand Moff and full command of the Death Star." "Well, unfortunately, today is a very bad day for you, Krennic," said Tarkin. Krennic said, What do you mean?" "Well, unfortunately, despite that you found the source of the leak of the Death Star project, unfortunately, the Emperor feels that you're not fit for this job anymore. So you have been replaced. Upon my request, I have asked that the Emperor assign Darth Vader to the post of head of security of the Death Star." Krennic's like, No, you bastard, no." "Well, don't look at me. I mean, that was the Emperor who made this decision. I just merely dropped in a suggestion of a worthy replacement." Krennic said, "Okay, Grand Moff Tarkin, I see your game, but you're going to be in for a very big disappointment." Well, Krennic left the bridge again angrily. Now we journey to another planet in the galaxy, the dark and foreboding planet Vajun. A dark and stormy world with acid rain and constant lightning. But on this world, there was a palace. A big palace. It was Bast Palace, the home of Darth Vader, where when he's not on Coruscant, he goes there to be alone. Well, Krennic's shuttle comes in for a landing on the very top of the palace. Meanwhile, within the palace, a hooded figure of what looked like an elderly man comes walking into a Bacta treatment chamber. There in the center of the chamber was a giant Bacta tube completely filled up with a figure inside and several stormtroopers around it. Well, the hooded figure comes in and bows down, and he says, "Lord Vader, Lieutenant Colonel Krennic is here to see you, my lord." Upon saying that, a hissing sound is heard from the tank, and the bacta begins draining from the tank. The old man sees the top of the head of a scarred figure with chalk white skin. Then we see Krennic waiting in a nice waiting room in the palace full of very weird looking art. Suddenly, he hears the familiar breathing of Darth Vader, and Darth Vader comes walking into the room, and he asks Krennic,
"What is the meaning of you coming here and disturbing me?"
Krennic replies back, "Listen, Lord Vader, I'm here to plead for my job back. I have found the source of the leak, and I have got rid of him. The whole problem with the rebels learning about the existence of the Death Star is settled. They have nothing." Then Krennic went on to say, "Plus, Lord Vader, you can get me an audience with the Emperor, and so I can get my job back." Suddenly, Vader angrily puts Krennic in a chokehold, and Krennic was struggling to breathe. And Darth Vader goes on to say,
"So, this is why you came here, to bother me. You want your job back. You want to see the Emperor and plead for your job back and snivel like a common slave. Well, that won't happen. The Emperor is very angry at you. You were in charge of security and you let the biggest leak happen under your nose. You're lucky that the Emperor hasn't killed you yet. And you're lucky I don't kill you yet. Because you're going to be reassigned to one of the most depressing and career-ending posts of your career."
Then Darth Vader continues to explain the fate of Krennic.
"You are being reassigned to the head of security on the base of Danuta. But the good news is you get to keep your rank of Lieutenant Colonel until you see fit to retire or resign, because you're never going to leave Danuta."
Then Vader releases Krennic from the Force choke and tells him that he had 3 days to get his things and he was going to Danuta. Well, the days passed as Mon Mothma, Garmbil Iblis, and the figure that was cloaked in shadow earlier in the command room, Bail Organa, were planning the major offensive for Danuta. There was a secret Imperial research facility in the outskirts of Trid, the capital city of Danuta, where the Death Star plans were hidden. Well, it was a huge coordinated effort. The plan was give Kyle an hour to break in there, find the plans, and then once the hour was up, they launched the full offensive on the base to give Kyle time to run out with the plans and escape. But there was one thing they were waiting for, the word from Kyle's friend, Mech Odom, who was working out there. Well, Kyle Katarn returns and says, "I had gained contact with my friend Mech Odom out there. He's told me when to strike. Tomorrow night's the best time. The base has been having trouble with the radar and sensors equipment, so tomorrow night they're doing a massive system update to all the radar and system equipment software, which will leave the base blind. They won't see us coming, so we could strike and strike quickly. And it's a great idea, your plan, Mon Mothma. Just give me an hour. Mech has given me the blueprints of the base, so I know where to go and I know where the plans are hidden at." Then Mon Mothma said, "Excellent, Kyle. Well, here's the plan. Our forces will strike from a hidden base and strike Danuta at their secret research facility. Hopefully, by then, you have the blueprints and you and Jan fly out, unless you want to stay and join the battle, but I recommend you don't. As soon as you get the plans, Kyle, and get away, head for the rendezvous point with the Star Cruiser Liberator. There, the plans will be transferred to another ship, and then will be brought back here for decoding. It's simple as that." Kyle says, what I've learned over the years in this business is nothing simple. Well, if I'm going to leave, me and Jan better get the Moldy Crow ready, just in case we have to fight our way out. Well, Kyle and Jan leave the briefing room. Bail Organa says, well, Mon Mothma, the moment of truth is here. I better get my end ready. Mon Mothma asked, so, Bail, who are you trusting these plans with? Bail Organa says, the one person that can only be trusted with these plans, my daughter. Mon Mothma said, Bail, your daughter? Well, Bail said yes. She's a fierce fighter just like you. Well, you've been always a bad influence on her, being a role model and everything to her. She just wants to be like you. Mon Mothma smiled and says, yes, I guess you're right. I always have been a very bad influence on her. And then she went on to ask Bail, and what about your Jedi friend? Bail replies back, my daughter will stop by where he's hiding out at and deliver the request for his assistance personally to him. Hopefully, he'll say yes, even though I'm sure he'll say yes. Then after that, they'll swing back over here with the plans, and hopefully we can stop that dreaded terror that the Emperor has been working on for years. Bail goes and walks off. Mon Mothma said, Bail, wait a second. May the Force be with you, your daughter, and your Jedi friend. Bail says, may the Force be with you too, Mon. And then he walks out of the command room. Well, the operation commenced. Kyle and Jan arrive to the Moldy Crow, and Jan takes over flying the Moldy Crow and drops off Kyle in the back of the base near a drainage canal. Well, Kyle cuts the grate and enters the drainage canal. Well, he exits the drainage system and makes his way up the base. He goes in through an air vent system and just scuttles about in the air vents until he reaches the area of the archive room. Well, as he exits the ventilation system, he was across the hall from the archive room entrance. It was quiet, very quiet. One or two stormtroopers walking by. As soon as the area was clear, Kyle runs across the hall, opens the archive room entrance, and goes in. There were several stormtroopers and several officers in there. The officer says, halt! This is a restricted area. You have no access in here. Kyle says, oh, you want to see my authorization? Here's my authorization. Then he pulls out his briar pistol. Then a brief firefight ensues in the archives room. Well, Kyle emerged victorious, but there was a small problem. One of the officers, with his dying breath, hits the alarm button, and suddenly the alarm sounds off on the base. Kyle's like, oh boy. Suddenly, at the situation room in the higher levels of the base, someone notices, sir, there's an alarm going on. It's coming from the archives room. I guess there's a break-in or something. Well, the base commander says, inform the head of security that we have trouble at the archives room. The officer that was operating the console says, yes, sir. Well, Kyle was now frantic to try to find the Death Star plans. He runs to the main console inside the archives room. He types in the location of the file for the Death Star. Well, the computer display shows it found it. Kyle pulls out a data card, slips it into the data card reader, and types in the command to copy the Death Star plans down into the data card. Sure enough, the entire file downloaded, and he pulls out the data card and puts it in his pocket. Well, he readies his briar pistol because now there's going to be another firefight, this time to leave. Sure enough, before he could exit the room, the door opens wide, and several stormtroopers run in, along with one person that Kyle recognized, and he recognized Kyle. Krennic walks in and looks at the intruder, and he says, wait a minute, I recognize you. Last time I saw you, you were all wet, and you shot me. So, we meet again. So, they now send you to break in here to try to steal the Death Star plans. Looks like I'm going to get my redemption after all. I'm surely going to get my post back as head of security for the Death Star. Kyle Katarn says to Krennic, I doubt that. You're here as head of security. That means even if you do stop me and do stop the rebels, you're never going to get back up to what you were. Krennic says, we'll see about that. Take this prisoner to the holding cells. All of a sudden, they were distracted by a loud explosion and the building rocking. The rebels commenced their attack as several starships, fighters like the X-Wing and Y-Wing and U-Wings drop out of hyperspace and engage the Star Destroyer that was orbiting above the planet. And the U-Wings quickly make planetfall and land right outside the base and deploy their ground troops. And soon a firefight begins in space and on the ground. Well, the base was caught off guard completely, so they really didn't have time to muster forces and fight back in an orderly fashion. So it was pretty much a free-for-all against the highly organized rebel soldiers and the stormtroopers that were quickly trying to get their act together and fight the rebels. Well, in the distraction, Kyle Katarn quickly grabs his Briar pistol and shoots Krennic and the rest of the stormtroopers that had him prisoner. So Kyle ran through the almost empty corridors as everybody was engaged in fighting the rebels. Kyle gets on his communicator and says, Jan, you better get me on the roof. I'll be up there in a few. Jan's voice crackles on the radio. Right, I'm on my way. Well, Kyle fights his way up to the roof, and sure enough, as he reaches the roof, the Moldy Crow comes in for a landing. Kyle gets on and tells Jan, mission success, I got the plans, let's get the hell out of here. So he sets the Moldy Crow for liftoff, and the Moldy Crow takes off at high speed. Well, after he announced on the comm that he got the plans for the Death Star, the battle commander announced to all the ground forces to retreat. So the ground forces retreated, got on the U-Wings, and fled. Well, in space, it was still a different story. The battle still raged on between the rebels and the Empire. Well, the Moldy Crow makes it up to space in the midst of the battle. Kyle says to Jan, set the shields up on maximum. We have to make the jump to light speed now. Jan says, right, Kyle. Getting everything ready. Kyle quickly starts setting the course to the rendezvous point as he was loading in the mathematical formula to the hyperdrive. Finally, everything was ready. Kyle hits the hyperdrive switch, and soon the Moldy Crow goes into hyperspace. Well, shortly after the Moldy Crow jumped out of the battle, the Star Destroyer that the rebels were attacking exploded and began its descent into the atmosphere as it was going to crash on the planet. As soon as that was happening, the rebels quickly made the jump to light speed and got out. Shortly after they got out, another ship dropped out of hyperspace. It was another Star Destroyer, but it was too late. The battle was over. The rebels won this battle. Well, finally, the Moldy Crow reaches its rendezvous point as it's dropping out of hyperspace. Soon, they had a visual on the Calamari cruiser Liberator. Kyle gets on the comm and says, this is the Moldy Crow calling Liberator, requesting permission to land. Soon, the Liberator communication officer gets on the radio and tells Kyle,
Moldy Crow, we read you. You're clear to land in the landing bay. Over.
Well, the Moldy Crow lands in the landing bay. They head to the bridge where they were greeted by the commander of the vessel. It was a Mon Calamari commander, and he says, thank you, Mr. Katarn, for the effort. Thanks to you, now we have a blueprint against this massive super weapon that the Empire has built. So Kyle gives them the data card, and the Mon Calamari commander says, hurry, get this transmitted to the Tantive 4. Then Kyle says, well, Commander, good luck. I already did my part. Me and Jan are leaving. The commander says, thank you very much, Kyle Katarn, for contributing to the war effort. May the Force be with you. Kyle says, "May the force be with you too." And Kyle and Jan leave, get back on the Moldy Crow, and make the jump into hyperspace. Well, as they were about to begin the transmission of the plans to the Tantive 4, which it was orbiting the planet Taprara, pretending to have a disabled engine, it was really a ruse for them to receive the plans. Well, on board the Tantive 4 in the bridge, the commander says, "Your Majesty, we just established contact with the Liberator. They have the plans and they're ready to transmit it to us." The princess says, "Alright, give them the signal to start the transmission of the plans." "Yes, Your Majesty," said the commander. Well, they began the transmission of the plans on the Liberator when all of a sudden the radar picks up several Star Destroyers dropping out of hyperspace. It was 4, and they began closing in and opening fire on the Liberator. The commander says, "Oh no, they're closing in. Everybody to battle stations. Make sure that information is transmitted at all costs." Well, despite the Liberator's best effort, it was outnumbered, outgunned, and it was now dead in space. After the battle was over, the lead Star Destroyer, which was none other than the Devastator, Darth Vader's ship, deployed several drill pods, heading straight to the hull of the Liberator, drilling in and bringing in a contingent of stormtroopers and battle droids. Well, as the battle raged inside the Liberator, a group of soldiers heard, coming from the dark end of the hull, a familiar but yet alien breathing. Suddenly, the dark end of the hallway was illuminated by the bright red of a red-bladed lightsaber. The soldiers were terrified. It was none other than the dreaded Darth Vader, the right hand of the Emperor. Cladded entirely in black, without one speck of color on him, he began to make his attack on the helpless rebel soldiers like they were rancid butter. Well, despite their valiant effort, the rebel soldiers were being cut down by the one-man army that was Darth Vader. He was an unstoppable machine, precise, deadly. Nothing could stop him as he alternated between lightsaber swings and force power usage. He fought his way into the bridge. Well, Vader eventually made his way onto the bridge and began to cut down everybody where they stood. Everybody. Including the Mon Calamari captain, cutting him in half. Then Vader made his way to the communications console, and there he saw that the Death Star plans were finished transmitting to the Tantive 4 in Taprara. Vader, after seeing that, told his stormtrooper that came right up to him,
"Get everybody back to the ship. The plans have been transmitted. And find out where the Tantive 4 is heading to. We will intercept it."
Meanwhile, on Taprara, the Tantive 4 had received the entire plans. The princess gives the order, "Tell the R2 unit to turn the engine back on and set course for Tatooine. We have to pick up somebody there." Well, the communications officer gave the princess the data card containing the blueprints of the Death Star. The captain of the ship asked the princess, "What is in those plans, Your Majesty?" The princess turns to look at the captain, holding up the data card and saying, "A New Hope," as she let out a slight smile. Well, as the rebels succeeded in obtaining the Death Star plans, in the other end of the galaxy, on the planet Despair, the Death Star was orbiting it, as it was now finished its construction, way ahead of schedule. Grand Moff Tarkin was holding a big party on the bridge, as they were about to commence the first test firing of the new super weapon. Its target, the planet where its construction was finished, Despair. Grand Moff Tarkin gives the order, "Fire when ready," as he let out a big smile. Soon, all the engineers began working hitting the controls and preparing the super laser for firing, and the test commenced.
Primary ignition.
test was a success. Someone says, Grand Moff Tarkin, the Emperor had been watching the test, and he's highly pleased. Then another officer called the Grand Moff's attention. Grand Moff Tarkin, sir, we just received a message from Lord Vader. He said he's found the missing Death Star plans, found out who has taken it, and is closing in on them. Grand Moff Tarkin said, excellent. When he captures those plans, send him the coordinates to where he can meet up with us at. Yes, sir, said the young officer. The end. Like and subscribe.